Hello, and welcome to Sunday Coffee with John and Reverend David. Although I don't even know if David drinks coffee.
I'm a coffeeholic. I'm a coffeeholic.
Yeah. Coffee's an interesting thing, actually.
Yeah.
But we're not here to talk about coffee. So last time we chatted, it was really wonderful. We got into some of the aspects of approaching the truth. And I say approaching because it's the ultimate bombast, perhaps, to say that you have the truth. The only one who could really say that was our Lord Jesus Christ, when he said, I am the way, the truth, and the life.
Yeah.
But in the meantime, the best we can do is approach the truth and do it gradually. Rudolf Steiner once said that the word Grail, one of its meanings means gradualis, which is gradually. And so hopefully we can try and add some logs into the fire of the heart on this one here today. So David, how are you?
It's always great being on your show, John. You're an inspiration to all of us, and I genuinely mean that. I look forward to these shows. How am I? I'm having a strange day. Churches are still closed across the UK, but the government has started very slowly negotiating with everyone about opening dates. My tiny little group is aiming, which is called Valentine's Hall. It's a long story. We're authorized by the Metropolitan Community Church. They regard us as an emerging church. My own theological background is neither here nor there, and there's a long story behind all of that. But we're planning slowly to open on November the 2nd, I think that is. And yeah, my theatre work has taken off this morning in a sort of nearly unexpected manner, because of course one of the other caps I wear is being gosh, I hate the word impresario, being sort of a minor esoteric force in British theatre, and that's come back with an unexpected vengeance today. So I spent most of the day running around trying to work out the implications of that and where it is we go from there, because there are 4 distinct projects, large projects now on the table rather, for next year. So that's me. I mean, how about yourself at the moment?
Well, I can't impress people as much as that today. My major project at this stage right now is being able to bring people like yourself on here and try to create some quality content and give people things that are thought-provoking. There's so much noise out there, some of it good, some of it not so good, some of it just blatantly evil. In fact, so much of it. Corporate swamp that we're all dwelling in. It's interesting you say early November. What, is that going to be around November 5th, Guy Fawkes Day?
Actually, it's just after Halloween, of course.
Yeah.
The old pagan celebrations. I don't know. I think Europeans have very different attitudes to paganism than Americans, for all sorts of historical and cultural reasons. I mean, largely it was the Puritans of this part of the world that resettled America, or those that originated as Puritans, who were against everything. And I tend to see them as very zen. But, at the most narrow-minded, they can be very challenging. So, of course, I think no, I'm trying not to get drawn on things like that. So the Halloween, for want of maybe a better description, was the pagan side of it all, and therefore the church had All Souls the day after, and so we've timed it whereby it's after this year's TEDx Lambeth, which I'm still involved with Haralampy Giorostikov the artist, who's a very good friend of mine. So we're giving a sort of round 2 on what conceptual art is. So that's the first big event this year. I hear on the grapevine from Daniele Irindust, who is my very, very good friend, that we might be moving it from the Royal Society of Arts to Conway Hall, which is the home of the Ethical Society. The Ethical Society in Britain is under attack. It's running out of money. So I think we've got to do our best for that. And of course, then there's the opening of Valentine's Hall. So those are 2 big events for this year. But next year tends to be conferences and theatre. I mean, I'm trying to think of a way to get you involved. How about that for dropping things on you during a live interview? To get you involved. I'm sorry, I won't do that again. To get you involved with a conference I want to hold on the Nephilim. Well, I mean, you know, maybe we can do it virtually or something, unless we can be very successful with fundraising. That's an old.
I've seen some quite successful virtual conferences. You know?
Well, I think I want some speakers physically there. I just like this sort of, you know, space age idea where some people are physically present and some people are being beamed in from other worlds. I think that might be exciting. And also,
an old friend of mine, David Spangler.
Oh, wow.
From Findhorn Gardens. We used to bring him into Detroit frequently. And other people from Findhorn, you know, Peter Caddy and the New Troubadours, Malik Tanovic and Kathy Lightstone, and all these people, wonderful people from Findhorn. Although I have to say that David does these conferences I've seen on YouTube here where he participates through this means through a live cast, a video stream, and it was quite effective. You know, I mean, there's more than one way to skin a cat. And I think that at this point, I like to go back on your Puritans thing, because that's something that a lot of people don't really grasp. And that within the Church of England is what's known as the High Church Party and the Low Church Party. And the Low Church Party, that consists of those aspects of church culture in England that are not participating in the, shall we say, the authoritative High Church Party. So you get all your different denominations that are present within the Low Church Party, your Baptists, Anabaptists, and the Puritans and the Quakers and all these kind of people, which the Brits were more than happy to send them overseas. That was the way that they were wont to deal with the difficulties they might have with any particular individual and or group. It's, well, we'll just send them off to the colonies, you know. And consequently, like Australia is basically a prison colony. Georgia was a prison colony also when it was originally established here in the United States. But so we have all these dissenting ministers, but many of them, like you say, were pretty stiff in the collar. And so consequently, we're more puritanical here in the States than you are in England. And in England, to say a bunch of bad things about the pre-Christian culture of England, it's like saying nasty things about your grandparents or something. So it's definitely perceived different. We have a whole kind of barrier disconnect here in the U.S. from any kind of carryover of the folkloric inheritance of the previous cultures, previous to Christianity. And there's good aspects to that, and there's aspects that aren't as good. But you see that it does seep in so strongly into William Shakespeare's works, so that's just an abiding presence with Puck and all the various interesting characters. I remember the first Shakespearean play I ever saw. They used to to do field trips from my high school down to this place called the Vest Pocket Theater. And we go see plays of Shakespeare. Little did I know, several years later, I'd be going down there for a very different reason, because Hair was presented at the Vest Pocket Theater, the same theater where I first experienced Shakespeare. And I was friends with many of the members on the cast. In fact, the lead singer of my band was the understudy for the lead role of Berger. And
oh, wow.
all kinds of people came out of there. Meatloaf, Sean Murphy from Eric Clapton's band.
Wow. Wow.
A lot of interesting people that
Yeah.
with many known people, James Taylor, and I didn't even intend to go down that corridor, because I'm talking about Shakespeare. And to me, Shakespeare is something that's been lost in modern culture. I think the archaicism of the language escapes the average person of 2,200 word vocabulary, perhaps.
Yeah.
But also because I recently received a copy of
oh gosh,
your book, Caliban
wow.
Redemption, and I haven't had a chance to look at it yet, though, because it just arrived. And but that's a neat thing, and I always try to be supportive of people that appear to need support. And usually, it's pretty indicative that what you're up to is a good thing. If you find it difficult to find the financial support, they're more than willing to give the money to rascals.
Oh well, well, I mean that's the first. Let me finish the conference thing. It will be on the Nephilim, Crystal Skulls, Lost Civilizations, and Bloodlines.
Oh,
and it came up recently that we were missing a 5G element, and I think you're an expert on 5G. So we've got to get you involved in this conference somehow. I don't know how yet, but take that as something we've got to sort out between us, John. And that's the first weekend of February next year. So, but I'll be letting you in particular, potential speakers, and other people know what our plans are, hopefully by the end of this month, and hopefully you'll say yes. But, 5G is big news, and there's something. Lots of people think there's something very dark behind it. So personally, I do see a link between all those things. And I think having you as an expert on that panel, virtual and actual, will be quite something. Yes, I mean, you've just waved at me my first book. The sequel is The Grammar of Witchcraft. I've got in all sorts of trouble about it for years. I mean, it's Shakespearean poetry. It's theatrical poetry. And I don't know why people didn't get it, because the Grammar of Witchcraft is a sequel. Caliban was the son of a witch, the witch Sycorax. Therefore, I've been accused of everything under the sun because of the title of the second book. But curiously, you've just hit the second project of next year. Victor Sobchak, who is a very good friend of mine and the best Russian producer-director in the country, in the UK, actually adapted Caliban's Redemption and the Grammar of Witchcraft into a stage play. And we're actually on the verge of exploring how to stage it in May. It will be quite a major event next year. So it's lovely seeing that book again. I've got my own copy around somewhere. I don't even know where it is. But it's lovely seeing that, and I will send you a copy of the Grammar of Witchcraft as a gift, so you've got both together. I mean, dear world, it's theatrical poetry. Don't get carried away. Yeah, well, probably the most ridiculous thing that was ever said to me. It was at a book fair I went to years back, and there was a friend of mine who said, "Oh, that's yours," and I thought, what a strange reaction. And he said, "Well, as a Christian, I don't think I should buy it." And I said, "What the hell are you talking about? Have you heard of William Shakespeare?" So that's sort of a bit of the potted history of that particular book.
Well, and that's the world in which we live. It's become the illiterate venue for television. You know, it's like people can't. They don't even teach children to write in script anymore. They print in block letters. You know, they learn to sign their name, and that's about it. Good luck reading it because they don't have any experience in writing cursive. So I guess that's the curse of modern culture, no cursive. Well, you know, it was the poet Rainer Maria Rilke. He said poetry is the most concentrated form of language. And consequently, anybody who spent any time on it would probably be inclined to agree. To be able to compress into crystalline verse profound thoughts that are not only profound but participate in beauty, so that the ultimate expression of poetry is to be able to approach the good, the true, and the beautiful, right? Of Plotinus. And we've lost so much of that. And I mean, I don't want to get on a pulpit here and start denouncing anything. I'm just saying that culture has become lazy. And so consequently, they have all kinds of pseudo culture being force fed them. It's interesting now in the United States, we have a pushback against the CCP, the Communist Chinese, and their infiltration of American culture. And Attorney General Barr came straight out and said that people that are involved in business ventures with the Chinese Communist Party don't realize it, but they have to register themselves as foreign agents.
Wow. Yeah.
I know. When you see some of the movie actors coming out, it's like, or like basketball players. I mean, basketball has become like more profitable in China apparently than it is in the U.S. And so they're striving to keep their masters happy. So it's just like stuff that you could, if I told you 5 years ago, you would tell me I was insane. And that's become normative in today's world over here. So likewise, it's crazy over here as it is over there across the pond. And I don't know. I don't know if Shakespeare can rescue us, but it sure makes it more entertaining.
Have you heard of the British black singer Stormzy?
No.
A man that will do. I mean, he's beloved of the British Labour Party. I've no time for him at all. Not because I think his music is third rate. His music is third rate, but because he strikes me as the sort of performer that will do or say anything to be in the limelight and get a bigger buck. He went around recently saying he thought Shakespeare was a bad influence. You know, so okay, which one of your writers actually came up with that? Yeah, because it's the perfect thing to say during times of civil unrest, and I don't believe it was you, Stormzy. I'm sorry. Yeah, I mean, the party that used to be the British Labour Party, I don't know what they are at the moment. I mean, I don't know what it's like in, the Democrats. I mean, the British Labour Party want to be our equivalent of the Democrats. At the moment, they're going around talking about two things, which British socialism has never talked about. Cancel culture. That goes against the entire grain of British socialism, where basically culture was seen as the work of working men, the work of working people. And it was our right because it was our property, and other people have been stealing it. So it goes against at least 100 years of socialist need to get more culturally versed, a socialist need to be more culturally active. And this weird idea, are you woke, which of course is the wrong part of speech anyway, to be, behind every excuse under the sun. I mean, I'm half on the side of Black Lives Matter. If there is a statue openly about a slave trader, I'm uncomfortable with it. But
but isn't history supposed to show us things so we don't forget. Those unaware of history are doomed to repeat it. So great. Obliterate all the history, and then you can make all the same mistakes all over again. It's like I can't find a concept by which I can embrace any of that. Besides, it's nonsense, and it was Black Lives Matter has been rejected by some of the original Black Panther Party members, and Black Lives Matter was founded by a convicted felon who's convicted of murder, by the way. So what kind of world do we live in which we glorify criminality? I mean, that's obviously something that is very, very disturbing to anybody who has any sense about them. And I think that basically modern thinking has become the modern dung heap of materialism. And get you into that narrow, shall we say, pig pen, then it's easier for them to be able to modify your thoughts because they own all the media, major media, and so they have a captive audience and have had a captive audience for so long. And if you go back to the research that we've done over at Americans for Innovation with Michael McKibben, who I interviewed just the other day, and American Intelligence Media with Douglas and Tyler Gabriel, I did a show with Douglas very recently. And then if you look at it, you look at the research that we've done to where we've uncovered the connection between the British elites and the deep state within the United States. And it's not a theory. We've been able to establish it as a clear document-based truth. It's a reality, so consequently, at the core of this is the Pilgrim Society, which is where all the ambassadors come to get together, and they get to have tea with the Queen, and they get to realize how they have to toe the line if they want to hang out with the big boys. I mean, it's the ultimate social peer pressure to be in working in that milieu. And when you look at its relationship to the Imperial Press Conference of 1909, that was the keynote speaker on that was our good friend Lord Rosebery. Primrose is his name, who was married to Hannah Rothschild. Then you see the place of the big banks and the big money and the big corporations, the big pharmaceutical corporations. The Pirbright Institute holds the patent on the coronavirus. Well, Lord Pirbright was one of the two major Rothschilds involved in the formulation of the Pilgrim Society and the Imperial Press Conference and the whole idea of government by journalism, which was developed by Stead, and W.T. Stead was the executor of the estate of Rhodes. Cecil Rhodes left his vast fortune from gold and diamonds in Africa towards achieving world domination, and it was carried forward. And his closest associate at the top was W.T. Stead. But to W.T. Stead's merit, he felt it went too far, and he left. He didn't like the direction it was going in. But ultimately, I wasn't planning on going in that direction either. I wanted to get more into the cultural sphere. But, we have to become aware of these things, because if you look at it, and you look in literature, for example, some of my favorites in the Inklings over at Oxford, the Oxford Dons, the C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien and Owen Barfield and Cecil Harwood and Charles Williams, all these characters. And you realize that they were trying to be the antidote to the modern trends in culture. They really were. And in fact, I don't have the exact quote, but I'll find it. J.R.R. Tolkien said that really the Lord of the Rings is meant to be prophetic, and which is kind of, if you look at the central theme of the Lord of the Rings, are we really going to let the orcs and Sauron prevail?
Oh, what a terrible thought. No. I mean, I'm sympathetic to social justice, as well. I should have phrased myself a little more elegantly. No, I mean, we've got to be careful. I don't want history rewritten or pulled down in front of us. Although, of course, at the end of the day, pulling down a few statues never eradicates the history. And what worries me, because I do a lot of work with the Central Asians, they're very worried because, of course, on their minds and my mind too, is the only two times when that went to an extreme. You have the Red Guards in China and the Cultural Revolution, where, of course, mass arrests led eventually to mass executions, and of Pol Pot and the killing fields. Anyone that wants to hold on to the old culture must be eradicated. So I think we're looking at very dangerous precedents if we're not careful. I mean, I saw something of an American TV report where one of the BLM speakers was saying, and it's one of those flash things where you see something on a feed and you think, oh my God, that was interesting. Then it's gone already and you can never get it back. Where some young virile black lad was saying, and if you don't give us what I want, if you don't give us what we want, we'll burn everything down. With me thinking he can't have actually said that. And by the time I got to my 1,000-year-old laptop, which used to belong to Noah, and managed to find the stream it was on, then I can't find the program. But I think you and everyone else now is getting used to the fact I'm no techie. But yeah, we've got to be really careful about what we're doing in terms of the. Well, in terms of the
of being a techie. I want you
no, John. I think you know the Pew knows and THA talks. No, I'm the country's least techie person. I look at a screen and it explodes, and I'm never sure what happens. And I press buttons, or rather, I stab buttons with my fingers, and they fight back. So I don't know about all this stuff. In terms of the Inklings, I think it was always C.S. Lewis that appealed to be more than Tolkien. I mean, the difference in the literature is really reflective of the different periods in British English, the language, in their work. I mean, Tolkien was professor of Old English, so you have this sort of heavy Germanic, life and death struggle all the way through, which is wonderful, but you end up thinking, well, that's not really the whole of life. I mean, it might be the whole of Old English literature, but it's not really the whole of life. Whereas, of course, C.S. Lewis was looking at the time in British English, of course, because you get modern variants, which are doing very, very different things, which is another conversation. But Middle English is basically French and English melding together. So the whole feeling is much more light, and there's a lighter touch, and there's a much more graceful way of dealing with things. So you end up with The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, as opposed to The Lord of the Rings, which I think in many ways is just as powerful, but more suggestive than The Lord of the Rings. It's much more. The witch in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe is doing her job in the way that Sauron is not. Sauron is obeying higher powers, or darker powers rather than him, whereas the witch represents the cold, the inhuman, all the things that the lion doesn't want. And of course, neither of them really are willing to disobey the law of the emperor, which of course is the power above them all. And you think, oh gosh, I can see that much more as indicative of a type of metaphysic I can recognize. That's how Europeans have been. That's how we've thought for over 1,000 years. I can see that much more clearly in the wonderfully graceful work of C.S. Lewis. And of course, in his theological apologetics, I love the problem of pain. How can a good God allow pain in the world. I think that's a beautifully written book. And some of the broadcasts he used to do for the BBC, we've all got to remember there was a time when the BBC was a national treasure. When long gone now, long gone now. When I grew up, when I was a lad, yes, I'm 1,000 years old, yada yada yada. But when I was a lad, everybody knew what the BBC said was true, and they had investigative reporters which went out of their way to look for the truth, whether our national governments liked it or not, and very often they didn't. Nowadays, it seems to be an unofficial limb of the Labour Party. And it's not even that. I mean, it's chaotic. It's at war with itself. And that's not simply the case of underfunding. I mean, it's been underfunded for a long time, and it's not kept close enough to the charter for governments to take it seriously. And I've still got friends at the BBC, some of whom are doing their absolute damnedest to keep the torch held high, but it's a bit late now. And certainly no one I can think of, would say everything the BBC says now is unquestionable, because it's become partisan, and it's become clearly so. No, I mean, we've got to be careful of the language that's used, the rhetoric that's used, the books that are used. And we've got to remember the mindset that all this is meant to be reflective about. I mean, I love Tolkien. I love Ian McKellen, You Shall Not Pass and all the rest of it. Glorious. But, this life and death struggle thing, we've got to be a bit careful of. European society, unlike American society, I suspect, is always haunted by the end of things. That's Germanic, that's Scandinavian. Scandinavians, and I'm a huge admirer of Scandinavian literature, which I intend to explore more openly over the next couple of months. They like the endings, they like resolution, they like seeing the antithesis finally resolved. But that isn't really the way other Anglophones country are working. And, God bless America. I love the way that was dismissed by everybody that moved over there. And all they thought of was new beginnings. And I wish that would come back. What America, to me, has forgotten, and forgive me for being so presumptive, is that everybody had so much faith in America. It was the land of the free and the home of the brave. It was a place where people could go, and there really would be the promise of a better life. And I think Americans, present company accepted, are a little too quick to forget what a huge symbol of hope it was. It is still to the modern world. We lose that type of thing and those types of rhetoric, those types of discourse at our peril. I mean, truly, right? There's a joke in Britain that's as old as the hills. We sent our religious lunatics to America, and we sent our criminals to Australia. But let's look. But let's look at what's behind that. Let's look at what's behind that. Britons aren't entirely silly. The very best of experimental theology, as well as the crazy guys, went to America. The Pilgrim Fathers are giants who believed in a better life. The king wanted them arrested. They had to leave. There wasn't a choice. They had to go. And, the very best of our religious thinkers were forced to leave the country at that time. And a great many of them ended up in America. And let's look at the Australian phenomena. The healthiest and the bravest and the most virile ended up in that wonderful country, where they're now making an entirely new form of English as opposed to anything else, and a new type of Anglophone civilization. Yes, the Hegelian dialectic goes on and on and on, and culture should reflect that in a much more clear way than it is at the moment. But, oh God, I'm just sounding off, John. That's no good at all. I'm just sounding off. Certainly the Inklings, for me, represent, which is the thread behind what I'm saying at the minute, they represent the past. For me, Tolkien, and a major professor, I mean, the book Tree and Leaf, which is where he's trying to explain his theorizations behind reconstructing old Anglo-Saxon, old Germanic languages. I mean, they're wonderful, but they're very reflective of the end of things. Whereas if you look at, as I say, C.S. Lewis, you not only get a much clearer Christian view, but you get the promise of something beyond the end. And I think that's something Europeans are having trouble with, but other Anglophone countries have embraced a lot more clearly than us. You know, that thoughts from an old fat guy on a Sunday. What do you think, John?
Well, it's apocalypticism at its best. I mean,
yeah,
it when you start to tune into some of these mythos, like for example, Star Wars. My good friend Douglas Gabriel from American Intelligence Media was the original primary consultant for creating the mythos that Star Wars is based on. And I remember back in the day, he was consulting with Kathleen Kennedy. Anybody who's a Star Wars aficionado knows who Kathleen Kennedy is. And he also was integral with Indiana Jones series and all that. For me, a much humbler thing. I was asked to be a consultant on First Night with Sean Connery and Richard Gere, but I was too mystical for the needs. They really made it just kind of a very visceral, physical, nothing super sensible at all. It's basically closer to an American crime novel set in medieval England. You know, I mean, it doesn't have the spirit behind it, and it's interesting because just this morning I was helping myself to Rudolf Steiner's lecture cycle, "The Fall of the Spirits of Darkness," and in there he's very, very clear in the way in which he represents the way in which culture and thought has detached itself from the spiritual world. And really, if you go to your ancient sources, going back the fourth post-Atlantean period, ancient Rome, what have you, it was just assumed as a reality that poetry was montic. It was something that one received through inspiration. Just as when somebody listens to music, I guess some of the last glimmerings of that truly montic, divine intervention in human affairs is it has to be in music. And if you look at Beethoven, it's so transcendental that you can't look upon it as some kind of a construct. Oh, he constructed it the way you'd like kind of build a car in your garage. You know, you just kind of assemble it. You could see that there's a great account in the secretary of Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, Conversations with Eckermann. It's usually translated, but it has to do with entries that were put down by Goethe's secretary over many, many years. And it's interesting because he gets into, he'll say, today so-and-so visited and this happened and they talked about this, that, and the other thing. And one of the interesting pages in that is where there was a guest coming over and mind you, Goethe was friends with Beethoven and he knew Mozart. And he had been given sheet music that was their original transcription where they wrote their music. Wow. And he showed the guest, I forget who the guest was at this occasion, but he showed him the manuscript that was Beethoven's, and there were scribbles on it and ink blotches and tea stains, and it was just, you know, you could tell that he was wrestling with this press. Yeah. And then he said, now here's Mozart. And he pulls up Mozart. And it looks like he was just taking notation, that he just he wrote it down as he heard it in his head. And of course, they both are hearing it in internal inspiration. But Beethoven struggled with what he was hearing and trying to resolve a chord, and how does it segue into the next section. And you hear this one thing and you hear it to another. What's the connective tissue that can bring them together? And you see how he works into key changes and all of that. And so you see that it's very much an inspirational affair. But Steiner made an interesting point in The Fall of the Spirits of Darkness. He said, as we move towards the future, teachers, and I'm just paraphrasing because you would have to cover the whole lecture to give it justice, but he says that in the future, teachers will be selected for their prophetic abilities, which is essentially going back to like what we discussed last week with Emmanuel Swedenborg, that he was very to the point in that he said that this is what he experienced. That these are experiences that he had. And when you get into understanding supersensible experiences, it's not something that happens so much through your head, is that through the participation of the spiritual beings that are in continual interaction with all your various organ systems, and then it has to be translated into your language so that you can understand what they're trying to say, which somebody, I'm sure, just turned off my channel because they think I'm mad. And good. I'm glad you found something better to do. And so consequently, no pun intended. And so consequently, when we look at these things and you say, well, what is truth? How does truth play into all of this? How are we to be able to move into a future to where we begin to give ourselves permission to receive inspiration? And going back to what we were discussing earlier, I remember with Findhorn Gardens and all the people I knew from there. I remember Peter Caddy, who was the founder of Findhorn, who's a real interesting character, former military officer, and with him, it's a question of inspiration. He knew on a level of will, if it was time to go, he had to go like then, because if he finished his cup of coffee, he wouldn't have the same experience. See, and to be able to come into a relationship with the world of inspiration, imagination, inspiration, and intuition as we unfold into the future, that's the greatest challenge facing mankind. And not all this we got to make a better mousetrap stuff, that we're going to fix all this stuff because we're going to come up with a better mousetrap. And it's not the systems that are at fault. It's the inability of individuals to take up their spiritual nature in a rightful way, because then the world can become an expression of their spiritual nature rather than all this layers and layers of decisions that were made by people that consequently, if you get into what Rudolf Steiner says about truth and ideas, he says that the ideas last as long as they represent the truth. See, so you see certain systems like the Soviet system, for example, it lasted like human lifetime, basically, and just totally collapsed under its own weight. I'm expecting the same thing to happen to China, except I think it'll happen quicker. That system does not represent what a human being is meant to be. Therefore, it's doomed to failure, however long it takes. One of the reasons for the success of the Catholic Church being able to even exist as long as it has is that it was constructed according to the hierarchical schemes of Dionysius, the Areopagite, to the 9 angelic hierarchies, and so they made the ecclesiastical hierarchies is another work attributed to Pseudo-Dionysius. And so consequently, on earth as it is in heaven, and these 9 layers of sequential authority is the basis of the Catholic system. And so it's clear to my mind that that's one of the reasons why they've lasted as long as they have. But consequently, they have become so unworthy in the direction of the current Pope, who's I question whether he's even Christian, let alone even Catholic. You know, he's embraced. He's basically become a political figure who has this whole bent towards this whole authoritarian socialist type of system. And I understand, it's interesting because you're in England and really all these different isms and all that, so many of them came from England. And socialism really was a British thing. I mean, really, it's British, And you have your Fabian socialists, and you have that whole nest of people, and City College London, and that whole group. And their logos of wolf in sheep's clothing. I mean, it's like, it's almost the same as the adage of the Jesuits, the end justifies the means. It's okay to knock that lady out of her shopping cart because it's going to help bring about the Cultural Revolution. It's like, what are you, crazy? But they were genteel, though, your original Fabian socialists. Now, socialists here in the U.S., they become absolutely insane anarchists, and they're running around trying to promote Kristallnacht. I mean, it's getting a little obscure for most people, but that's part of the problem that we live in, is that people have not participated in culture, and if you don't participate, you lose it.
I think it's a shame. I hate speaking about American politics. I always feel out of my depth. I don't understand what the Democrats are doing. I don't think they do, which is part of the problem. But I don't know. I'm only a Brit. What would I know? In terms of British socialism, when I first moved to London, I used to give talks at the Fabian Society, and it was all incredibly posh. And I sort of knew as this young cub that I was nowhere near the tax bracket necessary near to become a Fabian. And they were all concert pianists or high celebrity lawyers, and all the meetings I used to get this wonderful round of applause. Then everyone would be drinking incredibly dry sherry, and so I had very good experiences of the Fabians as they were in those days. But I remember thinking, I'm not posh enough to join all this. In terms, you hit something so important. Socialism in Britain was, I don't know, it's just something completely unique, I think. It wasn't this scary, you notice the past tense there. It wasn't this scary alternative ideology. It was driven more by a thirst for social and cultural justice. And the working man, I mean, if I hear that phrase, there was a time if I'd have heard that phrase any further, I'd have ended up screaming. For the working man to be given a working woman to be given their equal share of the social property, of social goods. I mean, it was as simple as that. It was a thirst for justice, a thirst for equilibrium, as opposed to anything else. I'm not quite sure what became of it. I mean, I never had the opportunity to meet Tony Benn, who, of course, was originally Viscount Linley, as far as I remember. And he seemed to be from that entire stable of free church. And I'm not saying he was, I don't know his case particularly. But, there was a group of free church, alternative thinking, very, very progressive individuals that just simply wanted all the different classes to mix together and everyone have an equal opportunity. A lot of it was as simple as that. It wasn't this ferociously ideologically driven alternative to culture, which is beginning to circulate at the moment. I mean, certainly when I went to the Findhorn Foundation, the Findhorn community in '78, when I was a very, very young cub, not sure what to make of it. I regard it as my first genuine spiritual initiation. I came away shaken by the beauty and the power of the place and their ideas. I met Eileen Caddy. I didn't meet the others, who struck me as a very sensible-minded middle-class lady. And when I first moved to London, my initial friend was Sir George Trevelyan, who sort of took me under his wing to a certain extent, and just sort of showed me the ropes.
Well,
are you there, John?
Yeah, I'm here. I don't know where I went.
Gosh.
Oh, start.
There's a very masterful static photograph of you on the screen at the moment.
Yeah, here I am. I'm here.
I can see it as a sort of photograph. Yeah. There's a black background with a very sterling image.
Yeah.
State of confusion. I'll look at my mobile. This is my mobile. And see what is happening. No. Someone has just texted me, tell us about your poetry. Gosh, where do I start? I mean, I see. Oh, thank heavens! I was just about to launch into a medley of Rodgers and Hammerstein musical numbers. I'm pleased to have you back.
Well, I guess the orcs grabbed me by the ankles and pulled me into the netherworld.
They'll get it one of these days. Did you hear any of that, John? Did you hear anything?
No, I had to. The system crashed, so I had to close my browser and reopen and come back in again.
Well, as I was saying, I met Eileen Caddy, who struck me as you're dealing with a seriously gifted psychic, an amazingly open spiritual lady. And I was a young cub, so I didn't really know what to say to her. Nowadays, there have been 1,000 questions, but in those days, I didn't know precisely what I wanted to say to her. And when I first moved to London, because like everybody else, I'm not from London, it was Sir George Trevelyan that basically took me under his wing and showed me about a bit, to which I remain very, very grateful to this day. I mean, I think you because he was into Steiner, John.
Yes, he was.
You've heard of Sir George?
Oh, absolutely. He was really one of the advisors of the Findhorn community. Eileen Caddy, I knew her. We only brought her in one time, but what a delightful soul.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
Really, truly wonderful.
Yeah.
But she was a student of Hazrat Inayat Khan in the Sufi order in the West. And of course, I knew Pir Vilayat Khan, who was the head of the Sufi order in the West after his father passed away. And Pir Vilayat Khan's sister, Noor Khan, was mind you, Hazrat Inayat Khan is a descendant of, from the Tiger of Mysore, the last Mughal ruler of India. And so he was quite posh in that regard, and she was a socialite. And when World War II came up, she ended up entering into the service under Sir William Stevenson, and was one of the first radio operators in France after the war got going. And in fact, she ended up giving up her life because they had instructed her to quit transmitting, or they were going to triangulate her, but she wouldn't stop transmitting her radio signal. And she was triangulated by the Nazis, captured, tortured, and killed at a prisoner of war camp with a great many other people. So there's an example of somebody who's living for other people, because she could have been in New York sipping the finest champagne, Cristal, whatever. And yet there she was, right in the thick of things, risking her life for others. But so Eileen Caddy's a remarkable being. She was the one who was in communion with nature spirits, and people would say, well, you're crazy, but yet she was able to come up with certain advice that was given by the spirit, so that they were able to maintain this tremendous, wonderful garden. Of course, once she moved on, then they had to get a hold of the Biodynamic Farming Association and use Rudolf Steiner's approach to be able to keep things going, because they didn't have her around to ask questions. But that's a whole fascinating story. Sir George Trevelyan, he himself said that his inspiration to enter into the works of Rudolf Steiner was when he got to see Walter Johannes Stein give a lecture. And that was the moment for him, according to his own account. Now, Walter Johannes Stein is the physicist who was the first history teacher at the first Waldorf school that was started.
Wow.
Even though he's a physicist, Rudolf Steiner asked if he would be a history teacher. Rudolf Steiner would do that. He would take somebody and have them teach something that wasn't their primary subject. And Walter Johannes Stein, of course, wrote the book, The 9th Century World History in the Light of the Holy Grail. And my first book, The Arcana of the Grail Angel, The Spiritual Science of the Holy Blood and of the Holy Grail, that is basically, in terms of an unworthy sequel to The 9th Century by Walter Johannes Stein. And in the preface to it, I openly state that there are subjects covered in world history of the 9th century that I don't cover, because it's done so well by Walter Johannes Stein. But Walter Stein was the teacher of one of my teachers, Werner Glass, and also Rennie Carrito is a friend of mine. In fact, he wrote. It's printed on the back of my second book. What Rennie Carrito said about my first books. So there's a whole connection there, and it's Walter Johannes Stein and Aaron Pfeiffer, the founder of Biodynamic Gardening, are two of my principal inspirations within the movement itself. And it's interesting because David Spangler from Findhorn, he once said to a group of us that he traveled all over, because back when Findhorn Gardens got going in the 60s and the early 70s and all that, there were still a lot of people alive that knew Rudolf Steiner. And so he would ask them about Rudolf Steiner. And I believe I've told this story, but I'll tell it again because it's such a good story. But he would go around and there'd be people, and anybody who's familiar with Rudolf Steiner knows that he was all over the map. He was a scientist. He worked in the arts. The Goetheanum is the marvel of architecture of the 20th century. It was put on to put on plays. and he also worked in gardening and medicine and education for the handicapped, all these various spheres of activity. But so David would find the person who knew Rudolf Steiner, and he'd talk to them, and he found that he got a very different description of Rudolf Steiner, but there was one common theme amongst all of them. He was always telling jokes. And so it kind of gets lost in the translation, though. You don't notice it when you're reading his works, that occasionally he'll throw in a little humorous aside, but it's in an obscure form of Austrian German, and it doesn't quite make it through in the translation. But I think that spirit of mirth, which if you look at his sculpture, the representative of humanity, where you have the Christ and he's holding back Lucifer above him and Ahriman below him, but up above all of it, there's this face that's smiling, and it's the spirit of mirth, and that spirit of humor. And he'd also said at one point that one of the most powerful things that one could do in the face of the devil is laugh at him, and that he would just wilt. And so consequently, understanding Rudolf Steiner's place culturally as being, so to speak, the one who was to carry on what had been begun within the German Romantics with Novalis, Friedrich von Hardenberg, and Johann Wolfgang von Goethe. And it's interesting that Goethe, who wrote Faust, and even in that time, people that would comment on Faust, but they never could quite get to part two, which is actually the most important part, by the way. But Goethe, again, we keep talking about Goethe, and I remember one of my teachers from back in the 70s, Carlo Pietzner. His son and I played Beatle music at a dance for the Waldorf School, and he's on the board of the Vorstand, the Central Committee of the Society now. But he played guitar. I played drums, even though I'm not a drummer, but I know how to do that because we always had our rehearsals at my house, for the most part. And so I picked a little bit up, enough to pull off a dance. But anyways, Carlo Pietzner once gave a lecture at the Waldorf Institute of Mercy College, and the title of the lecture is Life Without Goethe. And that's America, is Life Without Goethe. People don't even, who's Goethe? There's a street in Detroit in Goethe Street, and they call it Goethe. So being divested of culture is not an unusual thing here in America, where it's Walmarts and they really, centralization destroys culture. I can't even begin to tell you. And the great flaw in my mind in socialism as a system is that it is a system, that you can't put its rules into effect without some kind of totalitarian structure to fulfill all these rules that you're making up, all these better mousetraps. That's a good one, mousetrap. A better mousetrap. So consequently, I'm not a fan at all of socialism or any totalitarian system. And the free market system that was envisioned in the United States, to me, with the constitutional republic, is the best that we've got so far, being that it's also threefold, so it does reflect human being a thinking, feeling will. So there's the liberty, equality, and fraternity, the three spheres of human activity, and that it's at least moving more towards the threefold social order that Rudolf Steiner envisioned than anything else going on the planet. And I think you're right. I think the rest of the world is counting on America to pull this thing off. And it was said to me the other day, well, you gotta have faith in Donald Trump. No, I don't have faith in Donald Trump. I have faith in God. I have faith in Jesus Christ. I have hope in Donald Trump. And he seems, so once he gets the right information, he seems to be able to pull off the right thing. So I'm hoping somebody can set him straight regarding this 5G nonsense, because that's just not healthy to electrify the atmosphere even further. And then to say in Congress that, no, they haven't really done safety tests. It's like, okay. I don't know. I'm rambling because there's so many aspects to all of this. That life is like a rambling rose. You know, the more you pick it, the more it grows. And
there's nothing wrong with a rambling exploration of things. I think that's creativity. That's creativity. Two things that might interest you. I'm trying to hold this Nephilim conference at Rudolf Steiner House in London. So that, because it's this wonderful Art Deco, Art Nouveau building, and they've got a wonderful theatre space. So I'm hoping we can hold the Nephilim conference there. And I've got to open negotiations seriously with them next week. And it's your influence, sir, that's got me back into Rudolf Steiner with a vengeance. I used to be a member of the Anthroposophical Society when I moved to London, and you know what life is like, John. You get caught up in 1,000 different things. And I let my membership lapse, and then I remember thinking, oh, I've got to do something about that. And I never did, but I think it's time, not because of the conference, but it's time I got involved in those circles again, although that will be a lovely venue if we can pull off that meeting there. And for me personally, I mean, of course, I'm not a socialist, and I didn't end up a socialist. Technically, I'm a card-carrying libertarian, excuse me, for very similar reasons to you. I distrust systems. I mean, I'm very aware, unlike many other British libertarians, I think the party takes quite a different complexion in the States. But I'm very aware, unlike many other British libertarians, that the leftists have raised a number of issues which simply won't go away, and they need to be addressed. But no, I mean, I can't settle into that system like you. I think people aren't made for systems unless those systems originate from the divine. Human systems straitjacket us sooner or later, and that's never healthy, and that's never good. And we've got to find a greater form of realization. We've got to become more human before we become more divine. Becoming more human means we're on the way to becoming divine. So for me, it was always freedom and liberty. I mean, that's what worried me about the Brexit thing. I think I was the only party member that wasn't shouting in the streets, Brexit, Brexit, Brexit. And that was for two reasons. Nobody was mentioning liberty. Nobody. Yeah. In Brussels wasn't mentioning it. Westminster wasn't mentioning it. And it seemed, it was almost like two gangs of criminals carving up, a beast between them. The trouble was we were paying for the beast. And but the fact that nobody mentioned liberty, I thought was telling then. I think it's even more telling now, because that's almost a subject that people don't want to discuss anymore. But I do. Let's be free. Let's bathe in the light of radiant divinity and be free, because we're all children of the universe. We're not children of a state system.
Yeah, it's all you have to do is look at China.
Yeah.
And what are they doing? They're telling Christians over there that they have to really set aside what they're doing and get into worshiping the party, basically.
Yeah.
There's no other way to describe it. It's like,
well, it's idolatry. It's idolatry.
Yeah, and so I don't know. I run into people that are supporting the left, and they all they have is like slogans. They don't have any real content. They don't have any, and that's why consequently, like in the previous election, when Donald Trump got elected, thank God, Hillary Clinton didn't even have a platform that you ran on. You know, I mean, seriously, go back and try to find it. There's nothing there.
Yeah.
Her platform was more of the same. Vote with me and you'll get more of the same, which is just, absolutely insane, because they've been deconstructing the American system really since the World War II, most strongly, but even before World War I. And I'm sorry to say, but the elites in not so much in Whitehall, but elites in the city of London have been attempting to deconstruct America really ever since the American Revolution. They're always, I mean, the War of 1812 was a big deal, and people forget about that. They forget the way we ended up getting enveloped in debt through the colonial system being transformed into these United States. It wasn't meant to be the United States, but these United States, that there was 13 colonies that were teaming up together. And the Civil War was really, to a large extent, was a result of meddlings coming in from British interests. And people don't know that. They don't really understand that side of the story, because it's the history books for so long have been written by people that are a part of the system, that they leave out pertinent details that now we've been living in a period of revisionist history, in which people, gallant researchers, have been digging in the minds and finding that what really happened in more than one area. And so consequently, when you get into understanding the amount of meddling that's gone on in the corridors of power between the Privy Council of the UK and the deep state in the United States, whatever you want to call it, around the world, centered in the Pilgrim Society of London or New York, that was founded in 1902, 1903. They're the people that own most of everything. And if you get into you're like kind of like you feel for the Fabian socialists and all that, because they were addressing realities. Because remember, they were coming out of a feudalist system, and a system of tenured farms and the system of entail with inheritance to the eldest son, and all this stuff that came over with the Norman French, when they transferred the whole system of dukedoms and baronages and the whole feudalist system into England to supplant what was there from the Anglo-Saxons. The Anglo-Saxon impulse retreated into the city of London. Many Brits don't even know that. But basically your House of Commons is your Anglo-Saxon stream, and then the House of Lords, the Anglo-Normans. And still to this day, most of the houses with titles are old Norman families, but yet they've been disempowered greatly over the last 20 years. The House of Lords has, by the Labour Party, by the way. And the Labour Party, as you say, has become unrecognizable. Why? Because they're tied in with the UN and the whole globalist super system that they dreamt up. And so consequently, the Brexit thing, what is that? It's like, it's more like a turf war between crime organizations. It's like, which crooks do you want, grabbing all your stuff? And so it never really got to be for the people, the whole idea, power to the people and all that kind of nonsense. The people that occupy those branches of the systemizations are people that there's two kinds of people. I frequently say this. There's people that want to tell you what to do, and then there's people that want to be left alone. And there's this whole interchange between these two types. But when you look at these political systems, what are they? Well, who aspires to be a bureaucrat? Who aspires to work on some kind of like the Carnegie Foundation, as an aspiration? Well, that's your typical social democrat personality profile. So that's who ends up getting in control of all these bureaucratic, monolithic super systems. And so consequently, that's where we are right now. Because your average conservative libertarian type, they just want to live their life, raise their kids, be left alone. They don't want to be bothered. But I'm afraid you can't have absentee government. And so we're feeling the effects of handing it off to somebody else. And there's no other way around it. We have to take responsibility for it.
Yeah. Well, I think the whole socialist thing over here, I mean, it was Tony Blair
that
started changing the whole of that sort of working people's current, and making it something very non-British and also almost nearly unrecognizable. I'm at the end of the day, I'm some sort of globalist, but I'm not this type of globalist. I think that your metaphor is exactly accurate. It's a bullseye. What type of gangster do we want ruling us? But I don't want any gangsters ruling us. We got to make the correct choices to minimize the evil until we can eradicate the problem. But for me, I can't really see if you're looking back to Prime Minister Harold Wilson, that shows my age. Callaghan or any of those people, that's the last vestige of the voice of the British working people. Then you get this young scallywag Blair turning up. And that's when things radically change. And that's when you can't recognize British socialism anymore. And it ends up going through the recent absolutely bewildering permutations of Jeremy Corbyn. Does that man actually understand anything? Make your mind up, for God's sake. No, you don't have to keep to the same opinion your whole life, but make your mind up about something. It's really that simple. But at the end of the day, there's another irony, John. It's not even him. You can recognize him as a socialist personality type. It's the people around him that now work from a completely ideological basis and make decisions that have to conform to the ideology. That is not anything the older members of the Labour Party would be able to recognise. And for me, it's becoming increasingly bewildering that entire stream, there are many streams, and there are streams that cross-fertilise, and there are streams that cross each other in British politics. But that one seems to be going in circles and down the drain because it can't even be an effective opposition. No, I'm a constitution worshipper in terms of American ideology. I can't imagine a greater treasure than a written constitution. I mean, people keep telling us evil libertarians that we've got lots of documents in Britain that act as a constitution, like Magna Carta, yada yada. But no, we don't. With the course of the centuries, all these things fell away from the statute books. None of them are active. There are only 3 words which come from the time of Cromwell, when the parliamentarians managed to defeat the king. And all the king needed to do was win one time, and they'd have all been on the gallows anyway. But they beat him again and again and again. And therefore, our constitution at the moment is 3 words. Parliament is sovereign. But that can fire in both directions. I mean, at the end of the day, somebody had to remind the recent Parliament that although there was a Brexit referendum, that is not binding on anybody because Parliament is sovereign. not the people. And you think, oh my heavens above, where does all this stop? America, listen to me, America. You've got a great treasure in the Constitution. Don't throw it away. We are desperate to have one here. And there are people going around telling us, oh, but life is too complicated to write everything down. Yes, but at least it's a beginning, John.
Yeah, well, I feel for you, because that's the operating illusion in British politics, is that, Parliament is sovereign, when in fact, if you start to look under the hood, you'd see that really the power is divested into the hands of multinational corporations, as it is here in America. And when you look even further, the brilliant work done by Michael McKibben and Associates, unlocking the mystery of the golden share, that there's a special share in these multinational corporations that's held by the Queen of England. Okay. And it has the power, it has veto power over all of the other shareholders. So to say that the Queen is just a titular head of what's going on in Britain, that's not really true. She doesn't get her feet dirty in day-to-day politics in the obvious sense. But if you look at the way things are run in England, you look and you see that they have committees, and they have secret committees, by the way. And in these secret committees, the only person who knows who's in the committee, who's head of the committee, and is in touch with the committee is the Queen. Okay? And they'll work on bills, and they'll give them obscure names that don't mean anything, RSTV 2079, whatever. Just make up a bunch of stuff. And so consequently, there's all this stuff going on behind the scenes that the British people are absolutely oblivious. I mean, I've discussed this with British people, and they don't know this. I mean, why do I know it? It's like, but consequently, the only visage they have of all this is that there's this mysterious taxi that shows up at the Queen's residence, wherever she happens to be staying at the time, and these guys get out with these little, really nicely made red boxes full of papers, and they bring them into her, and she sifts through those, and makes whatever decisions she makes. And so kind of looking at that and saying, well, these are important things she's doing there. And while you think that you just having everything being done according to parliamentarianism and all this kind of stuff, meanwhile, she's minding the store. And she has a tremendous amount of power. And the more we look into it, Lord Mark Malloch Brown, he's really a Crown Gate head, and Sir Geoffrey Patty and all these members of the Privy Council we've been able to dig up that are in some of the highest positions in places like Facebook. And I did a whole history of this on Twitter. If you go to that's my Twitter handle right there, parked up at the top. I give you just entry after entry of useful ways of being able to come to understand what's been going on. So consequently,
I agree with you completely. Parliament is sovereign is the ideal, but it's a very denuded ideal. We need a whole written constitution, and of course, the idea that Parliament is sovereign is undermined on a daily basis because they all want to go and work for the big conglomerates the minute they're out of power. So it's and also I suppose in a monarchy, all this subterfuge, hidden politics, it doesn't come as a surprise. That's the way the cookie crumbles. That's how it works. But that's not the way for people to get a voice in the 21st century, and things need to change. I completely agree with you, John.
Yeah, and I've gotten messages from dear friends across the pond in the UK, and they're trying to ask me advice on what what can they do? And I say the same thing that I say to people here is, well, get involved.
Yeah.
Can't really do anything by not being involved.
Yeah.
We're starting to run out of time here, and I'd like to be able to give you an opportunity, if you want to share people where they could find your books or more about you. That'd be great.
I am the author of 3 books, 2 books of theatrical poetry, and my most recent one, Mount Athos Inside Me. I'm very grateful for shameless promotion of publications, John. It doesn't matter. Mount Athos Inside Me is an exploration of arts, culture, and spirituality. Thank you. This is it. I don't know if that's clear on the screen. Oh, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. It took a long time to write. It grew out of a series of conferences I attended for the World Public Forum Dialogue Between Civilizations. And it's a celebration of art and creativity and the inner journey. These things are ultimately linked, and they lead to very deep spiritual realms indeed. The theatrical poetry, Caliban's Redemption and the Grammar of Witchcraft, I'm just about to complete a 3rd and final leg of that particular trilogy. I'm not giving away titles yet because it's still just about to be agreed. That's, of course, Caliban's Redemption. That is not me. There are some vicious people going around saying that picture is me with a plant on my head. That is not me. I'm fatter than that. I'm fatter than that. It's not me. That was actually a brilliant image made by a Polish artist called Richard Gunzarz, and he said, "Well, what's it about?" And I said, "Oh gosh, right. To put it in simple terms, it's about the human condition being overrun by natural forces." And he came up with that wonderful image. So you're looking at esoteric poetry, theatrical poetry, and a book on sacred Christian mysteries. And I'm just about to finish my new book on Andy Warhol, which is yet another. Andy Warhol is not what you think he is. He's actually a devout, a religious man. Ha ha. So I look forward to. I look forward to
way.
Yeah.
But very, 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 very bizarre and very much, shall we say, sheep dipped. That's the in the intelligence community, the expression for somebody who's has links to the intelligence community, and he's a very unusual character.
Yeah, very unusual character. Yeah. Very unusual character. Yeah,
and he was friends with Leo's grandmother. You know that?
Oh my God! No, I didn't know that.
She knew everything.
Leo Sakami gets everywhere. My love to you, Leo, if you're watching. My love to you. My love to Lowell, if you're watching, and Roseanne, if you're watching. So these are great shows too. And John Barnwell is a perfect host, and it's always great being on this show. And if he's kind enough to invite me back again, I will do something about the window behind me. I promise.
Well, we can't just have 2 parts, because then we'll slip into dualism, and I don't like.
I'm always at your service, John. I'm always at your service.
Here's my first book, The Arcana of the Grail Angel. It's available on YouTube. Or not on YouTube. It's available on eBay beneath the YouTube entry, and also beneath the Facebook entry of this podcast. There's information linking up to it. And but this is The Arcana of the Grail Angel, the spiritual science of the Holy Blood and of the Holy Grail, a study developed out of the work of Rudolf Steiner of the underground streams of esoteric Christianity, which flowed from the Brotherhood of the Holy Grail to the Order of the Knights Templar and the True Rosicrucian Order. And the sequel, I don't have one here because I just sold a copy. And that was the one I was using, and I didn't realize I didn't have one around for a prop. But nonetheless, that's The Arcana of Light on the Path, and that's more of a meditative guide. And they're both available on eBay. And it's always a pleasure to talk to you, David. You're such a humanist in the best sense of the word, because you haven't lost the sense for the reality of the spiritual world. And we're human culture to continue. That's what's critically needed. And to express so clearly and deftly by Rudolf Steiner in The Fall of the Spirits of Darkness.
Yeah.
So anybody that's out there, I would highly recommend the writings of Reverend David William Parry, who's, I was going to explore your connection. What's with Hubert Parry? So how are you related to Hubert Parry, the composer?
We Parrys get around. We're like wildebeest going across the Serengeti. We get around. I don't know, because it was family gossip. Family gossip every Christmas when everybody got together. I'm not sure of the actual link, but I know he's my great something.
Uncle.
Yeah, I mean, I can't quite. If I'm going to be 100% honest, I can't quite remember what my mother said.
Well, that's interesting, because really that makes you then you also have great uncles as directors of the East India Company, which is a whole other subject as far as multinational corporations go.
I'd love to discuss that with you, although I can assure everybody none of the money filtered down to me. If only I could be the recipient of this endless corruption, but sadly, no.
Yes.
No, I mean, gosh, yeah, I mean, there was another one. I've got to try and remember his name. One of the original creators of the theory and system of hydraulics was in the family too. And it used to be family gossip when all of my uncles had far too much to drink after Christmas lunch. And the ladies of the family were running around with endless crockery, bitching about all the things that had happened over the last 12 months. So, and I wish I'd written it down then. You know the feeling, John. I really wish I'd written it down, but there we are. Yeah, there we are.
Well, anyways, it's to my total honor and pleasure to have you on here to converse with me and have a cup of coffee. And perhaps it'd be appropriate, like we used to do on the pew, if you could kind of give us a little prayer to carry us through the week.
Thank you. Let's be mindful, my friends, that we live in dark and confusing times, but the light is always brighter than anything the darkness can ever throw at us. May the thoughts of your minds and the meditations of your hearts be centered upon what's greatest within yourselves, because that is a true emanation of the divine. Never give up the fact, the hope, the faith, and the truth that you are the sons and daughters. We are all the family of eternal spirit. Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much. And goodbye.
Thank you.